The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor of Kensington Prep Academy's lobby the moment Elena Marchetti heard the words that would change everything. "Your husband is in a meeting, but he asked me to give you this." The receptionist smiled warmly, holding out a folder, completely unaware that Elena had never met this man before in her life, let alone married him. Before the story continues, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that restore your faith in humanity, please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Soulful Tales. It truly helps us keep bringing you stories like this one. Elena had walked into that private school on a rainy Tuesday morning for one reason only: to interview for a housekeeping position that paid just enough to keep her small apartment lit and her daughter fed. She hadn't expected to be mistaken for anyone's wife. She certainly hadn't expected the man in question, Julian Bennett, CEO of Bennett Holdings and single father to a shy 8-year-old boy named Theo, to walk out of that meeting, glance at her, and simply say nothing at all. Julian had lost his wife 3 years earlier to a car accident on an icy highway, a tragedy that left him functioning but hollow, showing up to board meetings with perfect composure while quietly falling apart every night after Theo went to sleep. He had built an empire out of steel and glass, yet he could not build a bridge back to his own son, who had stopped speaking much since his mother died, retreating into drawings of empty houses and silent hallways. That morning, Elena had only come to the school to ask about employment because her cousin worked in the kitchen and mentioned an opening. She had no idea Julian was even there, no idea the receptionist, flustered and overworked, had confused her for the woman in a photograph on Julian's desk, a photograph of his sister who visited sometimes and resembled Elena in the shoulders and the dark hair. When the receptionist called her Mrs. Bennett, and handed her the folder meant for Julian's forgotten permission slip for Theo's field trip, something strange happened. Elena opened her mouth to correct her, and then she saw him. She saw Theo standing near the doorway, small and quiet, staring at her with an expression that wasn't confusion but hope, a fragile, desperate kind of hope she recognized because she wore it herself every single day since her own husband left her and their daughter Maya 2 years prior, vanishing into another country with another woman and never sending so much as a birthday card. She saw a boy who needed someone to simply stay in a room without leaving, and for reasons she couldn't fully explain even to herself, she said nothing. She simply nodded, took the folder, and asked where she needed to sign for the field trip. Julian, walking up behind her, caught only the tail end of the exchange, saw Theo's face lit up in a way it hadn't been lit up in years, and made a split-second decision of his own. He extended his hand to Elena and said, "Thank you for handling that. I completely forgot," before the receptionist could say another word. It was a lie built entirely out of watching his son smile, and neither adult in that lobby fully understood yet what they had just started. Over the following weeks, the misunderstanding deepened in small, accidental ways. Elena did get the housekeeping position, not in Julian's home but at the school itself, and their paths crossed daily during pickup and drop-off. Theo began waiting by the entrance each afternoon, not for his father's driver, but for Elena, walking beside her to the parking lot and chattering about his day in a voice that made the teachers whisper to each other in amazement, because Theo Bennett hadn't spoken more than 10 words a day to anyone since his mother's funeral. Elena's own daughter Maya, 6 years old with gap-toothed smiles and endless questions, met Theo one afternoon when Elena had no choice but to bring her along after daycare fell through. The two children sat together on a bench, Maya showing Theo a drawing of a garden, and Theo, for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, laughed out loud. Julian, arriving late from a shareholder call, stood frozen at the sight of his son laughing, and something in his chest cracked open after 3 years of careful, practiced numbness. He began finding reasons to linger near the school gates himself. He began asking Elena questions about her day, her life, careful not to pry too deeply but genuinely curious about the woman who had somehow, without trying, brought his son back to life. Elena, guarded and proud, kept her answers short at first, terrified of what would happen if he learned the truth, that she wasn't the elegant, educated woman the receptionist had assumed her to be, but a widowed housekeeper barely scraping by, raising a daughter alone in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. The lie, if it could even be called that anymore, grew heavier with every passing week. Other parents at pickup began referring to her as Mrs. Bennett without correction, Teachers addressed notes to her under that name, and Elena found herself trapped in a fiction she had never intended to create, terrified that unraveling it now would not only humiliate her but shatter the fragile healing she had witnessed in Theo's eyes. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late October, golden afternoon light slanting through the school's front windows, when Julian's actual sister, Camille, arrived unannounced to pick up Theo herself and stood face to face with Elena in the lobby. Camille's confusion was immediate and sharp. "I'm sorry," she said, looking between Elena and the school secretary, "but who exactly do you think this woman is?" The secretary's face went pale as the truth she had assumed for 2 months collapsed in an instant, and within minutes, the entire fabricated identity Elena had never asked for came crashing down in front of Julian, who arrived moments later to find his son crying, not from embarrassment, but from fear that Elena would now disappear from his life the way his mother had. Elena, mortified and shaking, tried to explain, tried to apologize, tried to gather Maya and leave before the humiliation swallowed her whole. But Julian did something no one in that lobby expected. He knelt down to Theo's eye level, wiped his son's tears, and said quietly enough that only Elena and Camille could hear, "It doesn't matter what anyone called her. What matters is that she stayed." Then he stood, faced Elena directly, and asked her not to leave, not because of a misunderstanding born from a stranger's mistake, but because of everything real that had grown in the 2 months since. Elena stood frozen, folder of old habits and old wounds pressed against her chest, and finally allowed herself to say the truth she had been too afraid to speak. She told him about her husband's abandonment, about the nights she cried silently so Maya wouldn't hear, about how terrified she had been that correcting the mistake in that very first moment would have meant losing the only spark of joy she'd seen in Theo's eyes, a joy that mirrored the spark she desperately wanted to see in her own daughter again. Julian listened without judgment, and when she finished, he simply said that some mistakes are worth keeping, because they lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. If this story has touched your heart, even a little, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who believes, like I do, that broken families can still find their way back to light. Your support means more than you know. In the months that followed, the fiction became something far more honest than either of them had planned. Julian and Elena grew close slowly, carefully, the way people do when they've both been burned before and refuse to rush toward another fire. Theo began speaking freely again, not just at school but at home, drawing pictures now of gardens and sunlit kitchens instead of empty houses. Maya gained a friend who felt like a brother, and gained something else too, a stability she hadn't known since her father vanished. Elena, who once believed love was something reserved for other people, found herself slowly, painfully, beautifully falling for a man who had first mistaken her for someone else, and had chosen, every day since, to know her for exactly who she truly was. Before we close this story, I have one small request. If you're watching this quietly tonight, wherever you are in the world, please type the word, hope, in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, it means more than you could ever imagine. A year later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon with autumn leaves scattered across the courtyard of a modest little home Julian had bought not for its size but for its warmth, Theo took Elena's hand on one side and Maya's hand on the other, looked up at his father, and asked when they would finally become a real family. Julian looked at Elena, who was laughing softly through unexpected tears, and answered that they already were, that they had been since the day a stranger's mistake became the truest thing that ever happened to any of them. And somewhere in that golden afternoon light, 4 broken hearts finally, quietly, completely healed.